Hello, everyone. My name's Alex Absalom, and I'm speaking to you from California, from Los Angeles. And as you can tell from my accent, I'm originally from England. But David has very kindly asked me to share a bit with you for your weekend around the topic of raising up leaders. Now, just before we kind of jump into that, I have to admit I was kind of surprised to hear from David. I've known David and Christine a long time, and they're great folks. But I was surprised because obviously this is an Ashes year, and normally David's kind of getting on and trash talking, but he's been complete radio silence. So I just felt I needed just to address that. Check there's no hard issues there, David, for you. If things do feel a bit rough right now ahead of the Ashes, I've got a little gift I'm going to send over to you. So here you go. Here's some sandpaper, which I understand would be very helpful for you in Australian cricket. So I'll send that over. That will just smooth off any rough edges that are there. So just felt I needed to get that out of the way as we started off here in our time together. Anyway, moving on. So we've been in the States for about 12 years. And before that, we served in churches in the UK. We've been in Oklahoma City, in Northeast Ohio near Cleveland, and then in California. And since about last 6 months or so, my wife Hannah and I, along with our sons, our teenage young adult sons, we've been church planting. And we feel the Lord has called us to plant a network of home churches. So that's building around the idea of missional communities, which we feel is an area which is something which needs to be explored and developed further. So previously, we have worked with existing churches, some very, very large churches, helping them work out how to get smaller by subdividing into mid-sized missional communities. And then we're in a season now where the Lord's called us to plant and work out how to grow larger using these things. So we're deeply committed to working out how do you do church in people's context where they are living on mission. So how do we reach our friends and our neighbors? How do we go with the gospel to the places where we live, work, and play? What does it mean like to establish Christian community in those environments? How would we do that? And so that's kind of what we've been wanting to do. That's what we've been building towards. So jumping into that a little bit further, with our church plant, our vision is to plant a whole network of home churches. So it's not so much plant a church, it's plant a network. And we see these spreading across the city, across the region, and then they would gather together perhaps once every 4-6 weeks and do a larger celebration. So we're really trying to make the core shape of this built around extended networks of relationships that will meet in homes or parks or coffee shops or gyms or wherever people have favor, and perhaps in the workplace. So that's what we feel we're called to build around. What we do is so with the group that we're currently doing, it's always evolving. So that's probably been your experience as well. But what we're doing right now is every other week we do a gathering, normally in our home. So it's a Sunday, 5 o'clock for a couple of hours. We gather around food and we would do some sort of creative worship. So not necessarily instrument driven, not because we don't like that stuff, I love it, but because that's not a super multipliable model in every context. And so we're trying to help people encounter God and be as reproducible as possible. You'll hear that theme again. We will do that. We will then perhaps do some notices, stories of what's going on. We'll actually, before the notices, we will see if anyone needs prayer for anything, any need or their sickness or something coming up. And so we'll just break off perhaps 2, 3, 4s, pray for those who need that. We will perhaps have a testimony time, or see if someone's got a story. We might even prepare someone for that, ask them to share. We will then move into studying the scriptures. And the tool that we've ended up using a great deal over the months is something called Discovery Bible Study, which is a super organic, flexible way to do that. I'm not going to teach you about that today, but Hannah and I have a video blog, and we've just released one on Discovery Bible Study. So you can go watch that. It's about 12, 13-minute clips. So it's not very long. So that is on our website, which is dandelionresourcing.com. So dandelion, like the some would say weed, but I would say it's highly reproducing plant life, organic life. So dandelionresourcing.com. If you go there and click on the blog tab, you will find that there. And that's an amazing resource that's being used all over the world, particularly in the global south, to extend the kingdom and teach people to read the Bible and encounter what God is saying for themselves. So we do that, and then we will probably, the way we process that is we subdivide into small groups to do that, so people can share their private thoughts and feelings, and generally people will pray in those group communities, those small groups as well. And there's lots of social stuff and lots of informal wrapped around all that, but that's the kind of core thing we do. Then once a month we do a training gathering, a more equipping focus. So that's that gives us a time where we can do more intentional instruction and teaching. And then once a month at least, we will do prayer. In some forms, it might be kind of more intercession based. It might be a worship night. We're increasingly doing prayer for healing and seeing lost people come into that. In fact, just last week we did one in our home, and there was about 15 or so people here, including a young woman who's had seizures most of her life, and that's left her with mental handicaps and physical handicaps as well. So she has seizures up to 12 or 15 an hour, and so her family, her friends of her family knew of us, and so they brought this girl along, and she got prayed for, and the report back we had was that night she had no seizures, which for her was an absolute miracle. And the next day she just had one. So it's just wonderful when you hear that God's at work and he loves to heal people, including those who might be far from him or don't have very much faith at all. And so we it's just so for us such a joy to be in a context where we can get to minister like that. And for us, as we're building around three main elements in all that we do. So we're seeking to be making disciples. So we're forming making disciples of Jesus. So it's this highly apprenticeship model. The second thing we do is we are on mission. So we're seeking to live like missionaries in the context where God has us right now. And then the third element is we are naturally supernatural. So we do this in the power of the Holy Spirit. We want to be empowered to go make a difference. So that's what we're seeking to do. That's what we're trying to do. Those three elements come together. And then alongside those things, that kind of monthly rhythm, we're also reaching out a lot, spending time with neighbours and friends. We're equipping, encouraging people to do that. We have a separate equipping time for young adults. We've got a group of about 15 or so 20-somethings who we are intentionally investing into and calling them to quite a high bar of discipleship. So we're doing that over kind of a 6-month period. And the challenge is for them that at the end of it, they're going to be leading in a greater way for the kingdom. So whatever that looks like, wherever that will be, that's not my job to tell them where that will be, but I am going to, and Hannah and I are going to train them and give them experiences. They don't know half the stuff that's coming. They're going to be praying and fasting, and we're going to go out on the streets sharing our faith, and we're going to be praying for the sick, and we're going to teach them how to drive out demons and all sorts of cool stuff, how to read the Bible with someone who's lost. So lots of practical skills just to invest in these young people so that they can feel more confidence going as leaders into the workplace. And some will be called to church leadership, and some will be planting home churches, and some will be doing who knows what. So and that's something we feel committed to, raising up the next generation. So that's what we're about. A few stories. We've seen neighbours come in and come to faith. We've seen neighbours get deeply impacted by the Lord. We will stop and pray with people a lot, and people who are far from Jesus. And you know what? I've never been turned down when I've offered to pray for someone, particularly pray for healing. The only people who've ever turned me down are Christians. I've never been turned down by a non-Christian, which is interesting. But we try and live like spiritual people in the environment where God has placed us. And we found that as we just are natural and authentic, the Lord will bring people into our lives who receive that and are open to that. And we do a lot to build community. So we throw parties a lot in our neighborhood. We're like the party throwers. And we've tried all sorts of things. We do cocktails on the front lawn. We do ice cream parties. We'll do watching sporting events parties, Christmas party, Easter. We'll make up excuses. We'll have small groups around, just little groups of people for a drink. We'll do, we've organised some serve opportunities, invited neighbours to join us in that. So we're just trying all sorts of things to see what works. And I think one of the things I'd encourage you folks in is it's hard to live like a missionary. But the encouragement I give you is just to keep persevering and to keep trying stuff. You know, we've made lots of mistakes, or perhaps a better way of putting it is we've tried things that haven't worked. And hopefully you're trying things that don't work, because if you only try things that always work, you're not trying hard enough. We need to experiment. We need to push some boundaries. We need to take some risks for the kingdom. And in that, we're going to get some shared knowledge and experience, which we can use to greater effect. And so future groups that emerge, that get planted out of what we're doing, are hopefully going to be more effective and more on the case. But I'll just say to you folks that please experiment, please try things, take some risks, build connections, try and just keep that attentiveness to the Spirit and where He's leading at that particular moment. And as you keep doing that, you're going to encounter opportunities. You're going to encounter people who are particularly open to Jesus, and God's going to do some amazing things. We have a neighbour who's a successful attorney, lawyer, and he was about to go on a long trip to Japan with his family. His wife is half Japanese, and we bumped into him a couple of days before, and he was telling us about the trip. He said, but I'm really worried because I've not been able to sit down for the past few days at work because I've got terrible back problems. And he was talking about his back problems, and all the time he's talking to me, I can hear the Holy Spirit saying to me, are you going to pray for him? 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 So I eventually plucked up the courage and said, this may sound strange to you, but my experience is Jesus loves to heal. Could I pray for you? Could we pray for you to be healed? And he goes, I'd love that. So we just stood there in the street. So it's him and Hannah, my wife, and me, and our dog jumping around. And 30 seconds, non-religiously language, pray for him. And at the end, he's kind of tearing up and just goes, thank you so much. And you go on your way. The next morning, when I turned on my phone, the first message I had early in the morning was from this neighbour saying, Alex, my back feels completely better. Thank you so much. So I texted back and said, that's amazing. God is so good. And he texted back and said, yes, thank you. I needed reminding of that. So this is a guy who's not a believer. He goes off to Japan, is away for 2 weeks, big flight there, all around the country, big flight back. When he sees us, when he gets back, he can't wait to tell us. And he can't wait to tell us that he's had zero pain for that whole trip. He cannot believe it. And he's so excited and so grateful. A month or two later, we were hosting a party, and he texted us, said, I got some family in town, can I bring them? We said, yeah, of course you can. And I'll never forget this. We're out front, and he walks up to our front yard and front garden, and they come up a couple of steps. He's with his dad, and or his uncle or something, and he's introducing them to me. And he introduces this relative of his to me. He goes, and this is the man who healed my back. That was the introduction. And so we've seen story after story like that, just coming alongside neighbours, God either being naturally supernatural in their lives, or just us getting the chance to build community, or us getting the chance to speak into situations in their lives as a follower of Jesus. And we love to do that. And so that's really what we're trying to train the believers who are around us and doing, trying to train the Christians, that they can have confidence, and you all can have confidence in living like this. By the way, if you want to read more about our church, we have a separate website for that, and that is dandelion.church. So dandelion.church. Just head there and check it out. But if I was going to summarize what we do, we're really in the business of raising up leaders. That's what Hannah and I are called to do. We're raising up our sons to be kingdom leaders. We're raising up these young adults in our group. We're raising up the whole range of people we've got in our main home church, those who are believers, those who are not yet believers. We're trying to train and raise them up as well to represent Jesus. And so if you wanted a word that summarizes what I'm trying to share with you today, and it's just one word, the word would be apprenticeship. And I want to encourage you, if you are trying to raise up leaders in your missional communities, both people who can help you run them and also people who are going to go out from you and plant new ones, the word that you need to focus on is apprenticeship. And if we just take a moment to remind ourselves what that means, the principle of apprenticeship is one which we will all know in different aspects of life. So in the Bible, the word for disciple, which means can be translated as learner or apprentice. If you think about it, an apprentice is someone who has someone who's more experienced come alongside them, and they coach them, and they give them instruction, but also they give them guided supervision, guided practice. The person who is the apprentice gets lots of chances to have a go. And they're not expected to get everything right straight away. They're not expected to be perfect. They get briefed and debriefed, and they get loved and coached and have their hand held as they walk through this journey. So a good example of that would be if you've ever learned a sport. That's how you learn. You weren't expected to be a great sports person from the outset. You had to be trained in how to do that stuff. Or maybe you've learned a musical instrument and you would have been apprenticed in the skills of that instrument. Or if you're at the stage of life I'm at, we've taught our 3 sons how to drive a car, which is a pretty nerve-wracking experience as the parent, but we apprenticed them in it. We didn't just say, here's the driver's manual, go read that, you're good to go. Instead, they had to read that, they had to understand the rules of the road and what different signs mean. But you go through this extensive process of them going out on the road, and you start to some quiet little street or even a car parking lot, and they gradually learn bit by bit how to do things and what the pedals do and how to handle gears and indicators and lights and all the rest of it. And they will incrementally increase their skill set. And there's going to be some setbacks. There's going to be the moments where you go, stop! And they go, what, Dad? What, Dad? I didn't do anything wrong. And all the rest of it. But that's part of the journey of apprenticing them how to drive their car. And the goal is not that you will sit with them in the car for the next 25 years. The goal is they become independent drivers who in turn, in time, will be able to train the next generation of drivers. And that's an apprenticeship picture. That's the business that we're meant to be in if we're followers of Jesus. We are meant to be disciple-making disciples. Now then, in our church, the Dandelion Church, or the Dandelion Project, as we call it, we have listed core values. And one of our core values, I was going to read it to you, is this. We are with the core value of raising up empowered and accountable leaders who equip others. So we want to raise up highly empowered people. So what we mean by that is people who have freedom to innovate, freedom to try stuff. We let people make mistakes. We let people have a go far too early. We have an expectation of risk taking. So you want to be someone who is very empowering. So if you want to see more leaders in your group or in your church, you need to come with the mindset of we're going to empower people. We're not going to wait till everything's perfect. We're going to give people a go. And it might be someone who's not a particularly good leader yet, but that's absolutely okay. We're going to give them a chance. Doesn't mean you're going to let them do everything, but you're going to let them have a go at some stuff. But counterbalanced by, we have leaders who are very empowered, but also very accountable. And what accountability means is actually a positive word. It's not a negative word, but it means that you give them feedback. It means if they hit a boundary that's a core value for you or something that's important, you will speak to them about that. So, for instance, you might give someone the chance to perhaps lead an input in your group. Perhaps they say, could you lead the Bible study, or could you share a testimony? But if they do it in a really bossy, dictatorial manner, that for me will be a violation of a value. And so I would definitely talk to them about that and give them some feedback, and if necessary, intervene in the moment if it was really out of order. So I think what we need to do is be highly empowering and also highly accountable, both ourselves, but also in how we train and raise up leaders. We want them to be doing those things. And then through it all, we're constantly training people to have the mindset of, we're releasing you so you can release others. So we're equipping you so you can be an equipper of others. We want this to multiply and to go. And again, I think too much of what passes as discipleship in the church ends up being consumerism, because it's just about that individual feeling actualized and equipped and released. And that's not the end of the process. You're equipped in order to be an equipper. You're released in order to be a releaser. And so we're always saying that from the outset. So in fact, one of the phrases we use is, we're in a business of multiplication from day one. So everything is built to multiply. So that's our value. Now, tied to that value, we have specific metrics for each of our values. And the metric for the value of raising up empowered and accountable leaders who equip others, the metric we have is this. I'll read it to you. Do all groups have apprentice leaders who understand their APEST identity? So what we're looking for, an expectation we have, is that every group will have named apprentice leaders. So what that means for you and your group is, hopefully you're allowing lots of people to have a go, lots of people to do different parts. You don't hog all the limelight. You don't do everything, which, particularly if you're a slightly more gifted leader, that's going to be the tendency. But instead, we are letting lots of people have a go. But also within that, you start to identify who are your, as it were, number two leaders, who are the apprentice leaders who in 6-12 months, hopefully, are going to be leading out into a new group. Or alternatively, they're going to be taking over the leadership of your existing group, and you're going to be sent out to plant a new group. So who are those apprentice leaders? You need to know who they are. And then the related aspect to that is, we say they need to understand their APEST identity. So I'm not going to do a big teaching on this now, but by APEST we mean the Ephesians 4:11, fivefold, sometimes it's called. So apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher. And the reason it's important to understand where you are in that context is that it's going to frame how you lead. So, for instance, I'm apostolic, so I love new frontiers, change. I'm very pioneering. I like people who are wired that way. And so I'm going to lead like that. And I need to be aware of that, because the majority of the people I interact with are actually not going to be like that. They're going to be probably 70-75% of people are shepherds and teachers. And so I can be much too hard driving, not caring enough if I'm not paying attention. And so I need those other voices around me in how I lead and how I operate. And so we need to recognize that leadership happens in the context of team, in the context of community. Being aware of your own strength also means being aware of your own weakness and intentionally raising up those other voices in your team. So for instance, if you are by wiring someone who's more of a teacher orientation, so you love to be in the Word, you love to help people hold that truth out for others to grasp and to understand and to live in their life, that's fantastic, really vital. It's how Jesus has made you to be. But the danger will be is you can end up being a bit too complacent and settly if that's the kind of the only real voice that's heard in the group. And so what you need is those kind of more prophetic or apostolic voices, or even the evangelist in your context, who stirs you up, say, hey, we've got to look beyond ourselves. We need to be going and growing at the same time. So it's about having this balance in how we operate. But yes, so that's our metric. Do all groups have apprentice leaders? And then thirdly, we also tie to our value and to our metric, we also tie a personal practice. And the personal practice is just something that an individual can take on and live out. And so in this case, our personal practice is simply, I know who I am apprenticing. I know who I am apprenticing. And so my question for you would very simply be got my tenses wrong there. My question for you is, who are you apprenticing? Who are you apprenticing? There's probably no wrong answer to that question. So just think about it again. Who are you intentionally investing into over a period of time? So it's not just a one-off meeting. It's not just I had a coffee with a guy 6 months ago. This is like an intentional relationship. There's some sort of pathway or process that you're walking through. You're training, you're equipping, you're raising up someone, you're apprenticing them to learn from you, but also to equip them so they can step into the calling that the Lord has over their life, which might be different to yours, but you're apprenticing them, you're giving them opportunities, you're stepping back to make space so that they can step forward into that space. Don't hog all the air in the room. Some people suck all the air out of the room. Or, don't be that sort of leader. That's not actually a good model of leadership. Instead, we need to have some humility and step back, allow room for them to step forward. Know they're not going to do it as well as you would if you've had some experience, but that's okay. And they might do it differently to how you would do it, and that's okay as well. And we're not going to shoot them down for that. So we need to be doing that. So hopefully you're hearing by now, if you want to raise up more leaders, you need a culture of apprenticeship. A culture of apprenticeship. And you're doing it everywhere. You're doing it all the time. You're constantly just trying to live a life of empowering others. So one area where you can practice this is if you've got kids or young adults or young people in your life. Maybe at work you've got some people who might not be biologically related, but you can be a spiritual parent to them. And so we've done that with our sons, and it's amazing to see how the Lord has raised them up to be really on fire for Jesus, and going for all three of them are really going for it with the Lord. And Hannah and I give thanks for that. We're amazed. But I think if there was something we did do right along the way, I think we've intentionally invested in them, intentionally given them opportunities, given them room to try things along the way. It's been a culture of apprenticeship. And of course, a lot of this stuff is caught more than it's taught. And so just them being around us as we live like that, as they get to just walk with us in the stuff of life, so for instance, they know how to heal the sick because they've watched us pray with sick people hundreds of times, and we've drawn them in since they were tiny how to do it. They've just absorbed how to do it. Just recently, our eldest son, Joel, was telling us about a story of how he's away at university, how he walked past a homeless guy one evening on the edge of campus, and he felt the Lord prompt him to go back, and he ended up talking with this guy, and this man had I think back injuries, and Joel offered to pray with him. He prayed with him. He got healed there and then on the spot. And it was an amazing story. If you want to hear Joel talk about it, actually, that's on our blog. So I think I mentioned this before, but the website is dandelionresourcing.com. So dandelionresourcing.com, and then if you just click on the blog tab, and there's a few back, you'll see the picture of Joel and me, and how his story there. It's a great story to look at that. But if we live like that, we will be training people all the time in how to follow Jesus. So I need to wrap up. A couple of quick things I want to just rattle through to finish off with. Some people say, who can be a leader? So what's the criteria for leading a missional community? Obviously, your particular church would have views on that. What I would say, just out of interest, if this would be helpful for you, I would say 5 things. Number 1, they're committed to Christ. So I think to lead a missional community, you need to be committed to Christ, clearly be a Christian. Probably that means you've been a believer for at least a year. Just you've had some time to start to develop some Christ-like character. You're not just a flash in the pan. You're starting to grow in holiness, and so on. You don't need to be the Apostle Paul, but you are on the journey. Second thing is you're committed to this church. In other words, you're not some maverick or a lone ranger or someone who secretly hates if you're sitting there thinking, I secretly hate David Wanstall, then you probably shouldn't be seeking to lead a community in a church that he's leading. That's not going to be good for you or for him or for anyone else. So don't do that. So we don't want people who are going to often try and create an alternative source of power. So committed to Christ, committed to this church. Thirdly, third question is you have a clear mission vision. A clear mission vision. In other words, you know who it is you're trying to reach, a specific neighbourhood or network of relationships. So it's not just, I want to love all of Melbourne so they become Christians. That's like so vague, it's meaningless. It's like, specifically, who are you called to reach at this time? And again, there's no wrong answer for that. The fourth thing I would want to see in a potential leader is, are you willing to be accountable? In other words, will you let us invest into you? You don't have the arrogance or the hubris that thinks, I can just do this on my own. But instead, you have a heart that's teachable and humble. And then finally, the fifth thing is, can you gather people? Can you gather people? It's not my job as a church leader to give you a load of people. I can help give you a platform. I can help you communicate. I can endorse, affirm, pray for, encourage you. But at the end of the day, you need to go gather people for your community, particularly lost people. So that's the list I would use. And as you can see from that, it's a pretty low bar. It's not super difficult. There's an awful lot of people who can cross that bar. And I think one of the mistakes a lot of churches make is to make the criteria for leadership too high. I think we want to get as many people in this game as possible. And it's a bit of risk. Every now and then you might get the odd flaky moment, but generally we've seen groups be remarkably stable in terms of orthodoxy and what they believe and what they practice. And they tend to self-correct very, very quickly. And obviously if there's accountability, they get spoken into. So give more people than perhaps you think of. Take the chance, give more people the possibility to lead something. Next thing I want to just touch on is if you're in a group at the moment and you want to raise up more leaders, one simple practice you can take is delegate as much as possible. So if you're thinking, oh, look, wish we had more leaders, then but you can't see any, probably one of the issues is you're not delegating enough. So delegate as many people as possible. There's a resource that a friend of mine, Doug, Paul, and we created an online resource called the Missional Community Starter Kit. So you can look at that. It's actually a paid resource. But there's a book that comes with it. It's a series of 41 online videos where we teach you how to start and how to lead missional communities, how to get them to a place of not just plant, but grow and multiply them. And you get these course books that go with these videos. And one of the sections we have is roles to delegate to others, just some examples we gave. So things like overseeing the meal, facilitating the Bible reading, how you're going to engage with Scripture, welcoming, hosting, coming up with ideas for doing out activities, serve activities, people to help the kids feel engaged, facilitating prayer times. There's lots of things that people can get involved with and do. By the way, if you want to check out this resource, it's at another website, churchinnovationlab.com. There's also a link from Dandelion Resourcing you can check out from there. But that might be a useful resource for your church to invest into and get hold of. It's very helpful. But to go back to the point I was making, delegate as much as possible. I would say give away as many roles as possible in your group. If you're the leader, your job is not to do everything. If you're the leader of a missional community, a home church, whatever you call it, your job is actually to be the custodian of the mission vision. In other words, you're saying, here's who we're trying to reach, and you make sure that's what you stay locked onto. But beyond that, you should be delegating and raising up others and letting people have a go. Two more things, I think. I would say alongside that if you want to delegate, you need to make sure that everything is easy to multiply. So make sure that the way you structure things, the way you do things is very easy for people to reproduce. So if you're structured in such a way that you need to be a really gifted teacher to lead the Bible time, you are not going to multiply very easily. And that's one of the reasons we love Discovery Bible Study. Don't forget to check out that video. If you make the meal time incredibly high pressure on the host, other people aren't going to open up their homes. So for us, we make the food, it's bring and share, and we don't rescue it. So at one point we had a young adult group, Hannah and I were leading about 5 years ago, and we would like message around saying, this week we're doing pasta, or this week we're doing chicken, or this week we're doing whatever it was, crock pot something, and bring us, in America say bring a side. So bring something to go with that main dish, or bring a dessert. So bring a side or bring a dessert. And literally for about 4 months, all they ever brought were enormous bags of crisps or chips, as they say here, or store-bought brownies, chocolate brownies. And that's all they brought. And literally one time, I ended up taking a photo because we had like this ginormous mountain of packs of crisps or chips that was heaped up on our kitchen counter. And at first Hannah would get really tense about it, and I'd say, hey babe, just don't rescue it. They're going to learn over time that they're going to want something more than this. And I would tease them about it, and eventually someone one week, about 4 months in, someone brought something they'd made themselves at home. We made this big fuss about it, and it was fine, it was good. And then gradually people started bringing more and more different things, and so but a year in, we're having these magnificent meals and all this different stuff being brought along. And the reason I tell you that story is it's illustrative of when you lead a missional community, you're not hosting a dinner party. So it's not entertaining. Instead, what we're doing is we're family. We're extended family, and everyone brings something. We put it all on the table. And if we all bring potatoes, then we eat potatoes. And that's how it works. So That's an illustration of make sure everything is easy to multiply. And then the final thing I wanted to touch on is as you start to raise up leaders, make sure you do intentional feedback. What that looks like is you come alongside someone and say, hey, it was great you led that bit of worship time. You had some creative worship, you led that. Let's just do 3 quick things with that to review it. Number 1, what worked? And they can say, this felt good, that bit was good. Number 2, what didn't work? And you might have to just guide them in that. Or they might often be very aware and they go, it felt really clunky when I tried to pray or something. And maybe they're right. Or maybe you go, actually, it wasn't as bad as you think. Or perhaps next time, why don't you try doing this? And then finally, the third question is, who do we need to follow up with? And that might not be appropriate for every role that people have, but if you're trying to train someone to help lead the group, was there something going on in someone's life that came up? Was there an issue? Is there something you just want to chat with someone? Is there someone who was absent you want to chase up? So those 3 questions I think are just a super simple way of being structured in your feedback. So with your folks, as you give them a chance, be intentional in their feedback. So again, those 3 questions are what worked, what didn't work, who do we need to follow up with? So make sure you do that. So lots of information I've given you. Again, check out our websites. There's more content there that will be helpful. But the gist of it is, going back to our big word, it is apprenticeship. You are in the business of apprenticing others, raising up potential leaders, and extending God's kingdom like that. So if you want a discussion question right now, my question for you is, who are you apprenticing? So you need to be able to name them. And then the next question is, what's your next step in creating an intentional apprenticeship process? So maybe you don't have anyone, or you can't name someone, or maybe you do. But either way, how are you going to develop a more intentional process for investing into them, raising them up, giving them opportunity, giving them great feedback, giving them chance to try things, not shooting them just because they fail, and perhaps even set them on a pathway to them planting something themselves. So I hope that's really helpful, and I think you're going to be doing discussion as a result. So I'll wrap up there, and thanks so much for listening to me.